It's kind of rough growing up being a kid who is oppositionally defiant, because that means that whoever the man is, it doesn't matter who the man is, all you need to do is identify the man and then be oppositional to him. And so I've spent most of my life being rebelling against the man. And it was easy when I was a kid because my dad was the man. When I got a little bit older, I went out to camp over at Camp Yamhill, and occasionally they would play a propaganda game where they would all get up and they would give the man a name, and they would tell you if Simon said something, you were supposed to do it, which I would not. When I went to college, I realized that one of my deans was the man, and so I caused him insufferable anguish and consternation. When I got married, I recognized that my wife was the man. And now, by some strange turn of events, here I am as an adult man in my house, and I have become to my children the man. And the curse that my mother gave to me, "Oh, I wish you will someday have a child just like you," has come true. And I get to, with all of the glory of parenthood, wrestle with children that are occasionally oppositionally defiant. Parenting is hard. Have you figured that out yet? It's harder than it looks. It is painful sometimes. And it's painful for lots of reasons, not just the relationship you have with your kids and the anxiety sometimes you have with the kids and the insecurity of knowing whether or not you're doing everything you need to for your kids. Parenting is hard because eventually they start making choices without you. And sometimes they're good choices. Sometimes they're terrible choices. And all you get as a parent is to have anxiety in your stomach about what they're doing as your children. Do you know what I'm talking about? Every veteran parent here is nodding as they're like, yeah, been there, done that, seen that. There's a text in Hosea that we looked at last week on Sunday evening. Dennis touched on this among several others. I want to look at it just a little bit closer. There's this text in Hosea where God takes on the role. Hosea chapter 11. Go ahead and turn there. Where God takes on the role, earlier in Hosea, he describes his relationship with Israel as though a husband and a wife, and a husband who goes to show his love for his wife over and over again. You get to Hosea chapter 11, and he chooses a different frame of reference. He takes on the role of a parent, and Israel is his child. His child that makes poor decisions sometimes. His child that offers him great consternation at times. Hosea chapter 11. Starting with verse 1. He says, "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. But the more they were called, the more they went away. They kept sacrificing to the Baals and to burning offerings to idols. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them up by their arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with cords of kindness, with bands of love, and I became to them as one who eases the yoke on their jaws. And I bent down to them and fed them." In other words, God called tenderly to Israel. He redeemed them from the yoke of slavery in Egypt, and he led them gently and kindly. He eased the yoke on their jaws, and he said, "I bent down to them and fed them. They shall not return to the land of Egypt, but Assyria shall be their king, because they have refused to return to me." Verse 6, "The sword shall rage against their cities, consume the bars of their gates, and devour them because of their own counsels. My people are bent on turning away from me, and although they call out to the Most High, he shall not raise them up at all. But how can I give you up, O Ephraim, and how can I hand you over, O Israel?" One of the most tender moments in all of Scripture, when you look at God's relationship with his people, is this picture of a father who has gone through and provided for his kids, and his kids are making choices. And every one of those choices is painful because every choice dishonors the father and moves in their own direction. And so God experiences this anxiety of parenthood as he's pointing and saying, go this way, come here with me, let me lead you. I'm your father. I've given birth to you. You are my people. And they're choosing idols instead. They make their own choices. They go by their own counsel. And you finally get to verse 8, and all of this churning inside of the heart of God. And he's absolutely torn because the choices that they're making are going to lead to their destruction, and he knows it. But they're making their own choices anyway. And it will lead them into Assyria, and it will lead them into captivity. And he says, but how can I give you up, O Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? And in just that sentence, you get all of the anxiety and the conflict that any parent ever gets when they watch their kids make their own choices, and those choices are self-destructive choices. Because how many choices do your kids have to make before you give up on them? The answer is, you don't ever give up on your kids. And even with all those choices, God says, how can I give you up, O Ephraim, and how can I hand you over, O Israel? Parenting has lots of its rewards, and parenting has lots of its anxiety, and these are feelings God knows and understands really well. I don't know if anyone were to tell me how much joy and how much sorrow children bring to parents if I could have wrapped my head around it before having them. So people say children will change your life. And if you're young and single and have never had one, you go, yeah, I know. But you don't know. You don't know until you've been roughly a month and a half with no sleep. And then you realize, wait, they change everything. They change my coming and going. They change whether I'm able to travel to Walmart or take showers in the morning. Children change everything. And nobody knows the pain or the anguish or the discomfort of children choosing their own path until they're doing it. Last week, I spent a good amount of time talking about the responsibility of parents. And the responsibility of parents in our culture seems to get a little bit fuzzy because we have all sorts of other things that kind of feed into it. Now the responsibility of teaching and training our kids intellectually has primarily been a job of the state. And so some parents withdraw from parenting their kids. At this point, the school system, if parents do not, the school system will teach their kids morals and ethics. The school system will teach their kids how to think critically and intellectually. That's what it was designed for. And more, as parents withdraw from their role of being parents, what we find is that kids are still adrift because the school system is not a system that's been designed to teach kids what they need to be a real adult. So my encouragement last week to you was take this responsibility and take it seriously. To train up your children how to use money, how to date and court and get married. Take this seriously, training up your kids to be men and women of integrity and character. And even if, you're using the schools, which I think school systems are wonderful systems to teach. This is the only time in the world where a father hasn't had to teach his son how to be a carpenter or a bricklayer or a doctor, where there's a family trade involved. Now my kids grow up and they can be whatever they want to be. I'm excited about that. At least that part, I don't necessarily have to train them on, but I should still be involved. But it is our responsibility to teach them. And the Bible squarely says, it is my responsibility to tell my kids about God. And here's what you'll miss if you think that is the beginning and the end of the responsibility of parents. We have a tendency to be very task-oriented in our culture. Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, so I'm missing this set of skills. What do I do to get this set of skills? Well, if you're like me, you'll go on YouTube to figure out how to do it, right? Well, I need to figure out how to plumb something. Somewhere, somebody has uploaded an excellent YouTube video on plumbing, and there are many that are not. When Kim was pregnant with Abby for the very first time, the book that you had to go to know how to be prepared to be a parent is What to Expect When You're Expecting. Did anyone else here take a look at that book? It was required reading in our house because the man read it and I also read it. What to expect while you're expecting. I don't know if it's still circulated and it plays the same role. There's probably a new book that has replaced it by now. But the required reading for becoming a parent is always technical. Do this, don't do this. Do this, don't do this. Do this, don't do this. Makes parents neurotic about the kind of crib that they've purchased for their kids. Makes all of us get up and check to make sure they're still sleeping okay and they're sleeping on their side or their stomach or their back, depending on the decade you learned. Right? Like it changes all the time. But what we learn about parenting is always technical. And even when you look back on what I shared last week, what you're going to hear is something technical. Okay, so my job as a parent is to take my children, to sit them down and to instruct them. I shall instruct you in this, I shall instruct you in this, and I shall instruct you in this. And the relationship between parents and kids requires a lot more depth and nuance than the idea of instruction, because you can tell a child till you're blue in the face to do something and they just might not learn it. Maybe. But what kids need is not instruction nearly as much as they need you to live it. All the gifts that we give our kids, all the things that we shove at them, we shove at them our time and daddy-daughter dates, and we shove at them toys and gifts, and we'll clean out the Walmart toy aisle for our kids. Oh, well, do I need to do more? Do I need to instruct them? I'll find them a tutor. I'll sit down and take the time to do this. Parents have taken this seriously enough that several of our members do homeschooling because instructing their kids is important to them. But I'm telling you, for all these things that we give to our kids, the instructions, the gifts, the time, it's absolutely worthless if we do not give to them the greatest gift, which is the gift of having a father and a mother who have the character and integrity of Christ for them to emulate. That is the greatest gift you will ever give your children. And studies, statistically speaking, no matter how much influence you think you have on your kids or you don't, maybe you're a two-income household, neither one of you are able to be there when your kids come back, you still have more time and more influence on your kids than anybody else in their life does. Statistics have borne this out over and over and over again. You know, kids who smoke and drink almost always have parents that smoke and drink. Kids who, there have been studies on the refusal to wear seatbelts and how that is actually passed on generation to generation. If you have a kid today that doesn't wear a seatbelt, watch their parents. Bet you they don't buckle up before they leave. And it's not just smoking, drinking, wearing seatbelts. It's almost every habit you've ever had. You're eating. The cuisine that you share in your mealtime is usually the palate that your kids grow up and enjoy. So if you enjoy down-home Southern cooking, chances are your kids will get craving for chicken fried steak as older kids. Your eating habits affect your kids. Obesity, genetic or not, even in households where there's no genetic link, obesity still tracks in families because we learn so much from our parents. Money habits, sexuality, and there's a resounding amount of research that says that our kids always take our faith and our politics. They don't actually always, but they often do. Bible actually talks about this, it hints about it in a handful of places. 2 Timothy 1, probably one of my favorite texts, where Paul is writing to Timothy and he says, I am reminded of your sincere faith, Timothy, a faith that first dwelt in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and now I am sure dwells in you as well. There is, without a doubt, in almost every aspect of our life, a strong correlation between who the parent is and who the children will become. Regardless of teaching, regardless of opportunities, regardless of the schools that they're sent to, regardless of the number of tutors, children grow up to be very similar to their parents often. There's a text here in Acts chapter 7 where Stephen is in front of a council, and he ties into this idea, this connection between the behavior of a father and a son. He ties into it so closely that he refers to their fathers or their ancestors, the way they've behaved, and the way that people are now behaving in leadership in the Jewish nation. He says, you stiff-necked people, uncircumcised in heart and ears, you always resist the Holy Spirit. As your fathers did, so do you. Which of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? And they killed those who announced beforehand the coming of the righteous one, whom you have now betrayed and murdered. So here Stephen is in the middle of this inquisition with a bunch of religious leaders, and he says, the reason you behave the way that you do is because your fathers have behaved that way before you. You're doing exactly what your fathers have done. Which of the prophets have they not murdered? Which of the prophets did they not persecute? Which of the prophets did they not reject? And now, hear that Jesus is before you, and I'm confessing him, you reject me too, because you are your father's son. Jesus gets into this, by the way. There's a lengthy exchange in John chapter 8. I want to take a look at this, because this will draw a sharp contrast. John chapter 8, starting with verse 37. Jesus is in an exchange with a group of Jews. Now, realize, too, there is a Jewish mindset, right? That your identity is really caught up in who you have as a father. And so the Jews believed that their source of privilege was because Abraham was their father. Every blessing that they can receive from God is traced back to that heritage. The promise has been given to Abraham, that was passed on to Jacob, was passed on to all the descendants. They are blessed because Abraham is their father. And Jesus is challenging this idea. He starts in John chapter 8, verse 37. Jesus says, I know that you are offspring of Abraham, you are children of Abraham, yet you seek to kill me because my word finds no place in you. I speak of what I have seen with my father, and you do what you have heard from your father. And they answered him, Abraham is our father. And Jesus said to them, if you were Abraham's children, you would be doing the works Abraham did, but now you seek to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. This is not what Abraham did, but you are doing the works that your father did. And they said to him, we were not born of sexual immorality. We have one Father, even God. Skipping down to verse 44. You are of your father, and he comes right out and he says it at this point. But notice what he's doing right at the very beginning. Jesus is setting up this equation where he says, your behavior is a reflection of who your father is. So we can tell who your father is based on how you behave. There's this equivalency in the way Jesus is addressing them, right? And so he says, I know that you've descended from Abraham, but Abraham is not your father because you're not behaving the ways that Abraham has behaved. And in verse 44, he comes out and he says what he's been beating around the bush on. And he says, you are of your father, the devil. And your will is to do what your fathers desire. He was a murderer from the beginning, and he does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. When he speaks lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. But because I tell the truth, you do not believe me. In other words, Jesus says, it is a family value for you. You're behaving the same way your father has behaved. And because of the way you behave, I know that Abraham is not really your father, because Abraham would have received the message that I'm giving you. But because Satan is your father, You only see, hear, understand, and speak in lies. And because I speak the truth, you can't understand it. But because I tell you the truth, you do not believe me. Now, which one of you convicts me of sin? If I tell you the truth, why will you not believe me? Whoever is of God hears the words of God. The reason why you do not hear them is because you do not know God. Now, it is absolutely true in the Bible that this association, that the Son takes on the character of the Father. It is so true that it has become a second nature to the way we read this in the Bible. We don't even give it a second thought. When somebody says, the son of iniquity, the son of righteousness, the son of God, sons of Satan, we recognize that what the Bible is saying in a very shorthanded way, this is a Hebrew idiom, but what it's saying here is these character points of your that we see in you had to have come from your father. And that's why the Bible refers to the sons of iniquity, of wickedness, of righteousness, of light, and of the law. Your kids take a lot of what they see and learn in your home. And I want to pause here, and obviously they don't always. But I want to pause here and challenge you as parents to realize, parents, do you realize the great opportunity that you have in your home? That kids today are robbed from in almost every other aspect of their life. In fact, probably your home is now the only bastion where kids will ever figure out what it is to really be a person. Here's what I mean. When I was in high school, our youth program did mission trips in a different way than most churches do. When we did our mission program every year, we got together and we rehearsed a bunch of Christian skits. We rehearsed songs to share, and then we traveled all over the West Coast to churches, large and small, and we did performances, encouraging people with skits and songs and different things. And when I was a freshman in high school, every youth group has one or two or three young ladies that the guys have a crush on, right? Right. If they're particularly evangelistic, the youth group explodes with guys, right? So just calling it how it is. As we were traveling all around, getting up early in the morning to go drive and then setting up to do a performance, a skit, songs at different places, it was a very hectic schedule. And we'd go and we'd drive, we'd have host homes that put us up, and we'd get up and we'd drive. Well, the frenetic pace of getting up and traveling and putting things together every day meant that some of the girls in our youth group had less time than they were accustomed to having in the morning to prepare themselves. What I did not know as a freshman in high school was that this may dramatically affect the way these young ladies looked when I saw them in the morning. You guys, this has scarred me for life. I'm just saying, I know a lot of ladies never leave without putting their face on, but there's some false advertising going on with this. And I just want you to know that when finally, in all of your glory, a guy will see you with your real face, he may be surprised. Right? Now, I'm not saying don't wear makeup. I'm just saying it was a shock to me as a freshman in high school. Okay? But in our culture today, people live almost every aspect of their life like this. Your kids, now, preteens and teens, live with almost every interaction they have with somebody else through a screen. almost exclusively. For every 10 interactions they get through a screen, they'll have one interaction with a person in real life. And everything that they see in those screens is a lie about who people are. Everything is. From the photos that you see on Instagram, which are curated. Nobody is crying, everybody is happy. They're on an adventure. They're eating fantastic food. They're having a great latte. It's a curated set of photos to talk about what their life is like. Occasionally, there will be lots of exchanges with, not just with Instagram, but with Snapchat. I tried. That's a miserable platform. It's almost impossible for an old person to use. But what you get are glimpses of somebody's life, the highlights of somebody's life, but no real interaction with how to love and care about somebody. And what makes it even harder is that not only do photos not get uploaded if they're not exactly what you need them to be, but there are now apps that you can download to Photoshop. I know it's not actually Photoshop, but to Photoshop the pictures to make sure that they look right before you send them up. And then you play a game as a kid. You play a game and you watch those photos and you wonder if they were good enough for somebody to like or to love or to heart or to comment on. And year after year, what we do with our kids is we train them that they're willing to be loved, but only at a distance. Only if you can see me through Photoshop. Only if you can see me at my highlights. Now, yes, I know they go to school, but I'm telling you, all their school friends they see more digitally than they do in person. Now, what I'm telling you is you have a marvelous opportunity in your home to teach your kids something today that they will never learn anywhere else. You can teach them what it is to be a real person who really loves, warts and all, ugliness and all. You can teach them what steadfast love is, because the home is now the only context where they're going to understand what it is to be a real person, warts and all, and still be loved and cared about. But the greatest gift you can give them is you. Now, I know that kids don't choose the path of their parents always. That's the glory of the gospel, is that you're not determined down one path. You can choose. That's why we can take as a badge of honor that we are children of God, because we can choose who we are, how we behave, and what path we go down. But you are still the greatest gift that you can give to your kids. And so I want to offer just two things for you to consider. The first one is this: that as a parent of children, you should be spending time on you. I know. We've spent the last 30 years saying kids don't have enough time with their parents. So to be a good parent, you must spend all of your time with your kids. Well, and it's not bad to spend a lot of time with your kids. Please don't be an absentee parent. But here's what I'm saying. If your kids are the whole purpose for you being a parent, you're going to discover that you don't actually know who you are when the kids are gone. And worse yet, if your kids grow up and get married and all of your identity has been in your children, you're going to make their marriage miserable, because you're still going to be there involved in their marriage and in their life, because you don't know who you are. And no matter how much time you're giving them, remember the Bible. Do you know that that passage in 1 Corinthians where Paul says, do not be deceived, bad company corrupts good morals? Do you know that one, right? We always teach that to our kids. Beware of people in the world. They're going to be a bad influence on you. Well, from Paul's perspective, the bad company were not people in the world. They were believers that were leading other believers astray. And so what I'm telling you is you can spend all the time you want with your kids, but if you are not the person you need to be, that's a really pointless endeavor. So spend time on you. When your kids leave, you won't know how to be you if you're not a person who is growing and working on you. You know, for decades, parents virtually neglected their kids. Kids were an asset, kids were a glory, but kids were not the center of the house. For the last 30 years, we've spent most of our time praising children as the center of their house. And when they leave the home, they wonder why they're not the center of their university. They wonder why they're not the center of the employer's job or workforce, and they wonder why they're not the center of the universe. But if they have parents who are learning and growing and working on themselves, they'll learn that. Because I don't want you to get to a spot where you know how to be a dad, but you don't know how to be a husband. You know how to be a mom, but you don't know how to be a Christian. The first thing I'm going to suggest is that you actually spend time figuring out who you are and grow. The second one is this. You're going to have to decide at one point, hopefully now or yesterday, what your family values are. And I mean, run it through a fine-tooth comb. Because there are households where kids will never miss a Little League practice. Ever. Team sport. Everybody depends on us. But church is optional. I mean, just imagine. I mean, because I know this conversation goes on all across the board, right? Can I go and stay out until 2 o'clock in the morning? No, Jimmy, it's Tuesday. It's a school night. You have to get up for school, right? Most of the time, by the time we're adults, we've stopped doing that too, because we know that, you know, if it's a work day, we have to get up and actually go to work, right? But for some strange reason, Sunday morning and Saturday night is never as guarded as the school nights are. Ever. And so school nights are not optional. No, you can't. You have to be responsible. Go to school. But Saturday, maybe. Decide what your family values are. You know, some families get up every morning and their kids fight every week about whether or not they should go to church. Some families wake up and that conversation has already been had. And they know where they're going to be. And they know what they're going to be invested in. It's not just church. Decide your family values. Who are you going to be regarding money? Who are you going to be regarding the way you disagree with people? Do your kids go home and hear you gossip about the people you disagree with? They'll hear that. They'll learn. They'll become a family value. I've watched that get passed down generation after generation after generation. How's your prayer life? Is there any legitimate risk that your kids may actually interrupt your prayers? No? How's your personal study life? Is there any chance they're going to stumble upon you with an open Bible? No? You cannot possibly expect more from your kids than the bar that you're willing to raise for them. The greatest gift you can ever give your kids is you. The good news is you can choose what those values are. And the reality is, those two ideas, spending time on yourself, deciding what your family values are, the reality is you could boil this all down to this one phrase. Here's how you can be a good parent. Ready? It's probably not all the teaching time that you're going to take with your kids. It's probably not going to be all the hikes and the exploration and all the fun things. And it's not going to be all the toys. Good grief, they don't need more toys. It's going to be if they have a mom or a dad that is committed to being a disciple of Jesus Christ. Because if they are, those are kids that are truly blessed. You could boil it all down to this. Parents, be a disciple. Take the teachings of Jesus seriously enough that they transform your life. If you find yourself in a situation where you now have become the man, imitate the man. It's not our kids. It's not just our kids that suffer when the church doesn't take discipleship seriously. Our evangelism suffers when we're not serious disciples. Our witness of who Jesus is suffers when our lives do not change to look like His. Everything suffers. And so it's frustrating, actually, because when you want to talk to parents about some of the key ideas for developing and raising kids in a healthy environment, the responsibility to teach them is one of this, but the responsibility to be is another big one. By the time I get done telling parents, hey, who you are matters because it matters to your kids, I could have preached the same lesson and said, who you are matters because it affects everybody else in your life. And that's really where I'm at. The church needs people who take discipleship seriously. This idea that we will look more like Jesus tomorrow than we do today, that are invested in growing and learning and developing, that are not in neutral. And even when your kids leave your home, it is still important for Jesus to have disciples that look like Him.